The soul. What is the Hebraic understanding of the soul? Because I've been taught that the soul is your mind, your will, your emotions. And so, like, is that accurate?
Okay, another excellent question. Based on our teachings, and I'm gonna refer you back to the same book, Everlasting Life, because this is when the Father goes into the whole concept of souls and spirits. And he does so in later writings, but this is where it starts. He talks about there being three phases of death. Okay, and this is also, I think, in the absorption manual. There's a class he gave slash lecture when he came out from Israel to the States after he was, allowed to leave the land. At a certain point, because of his status, he wasn't allowed to leave the land. And that he wouldn't be able to get back in. But once they worked all that out with the government, he was allowed to leave. And he began to do tours to the different jurisdictions here in America and Europe. And one of the classes he brought after he wrote the book Everlasting Life was spiritual warfare.
Yeah.
And the notes of spiritual warfare are outlined in the absorption manual from that class. Okay, so I recommend you go and check out that portion in the book. But in there, in that class book, he talks about there being three phases of death. And the first phase is, the moment that you decide to acquiesce you make that conscious decision and choice in your mind. Okay, and he used the example what happened in the Genesis with Nikki Vaughn and Zakar when they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The moment that they opened their mind to eat it and digest that idea, that mindset, that understanding, and began to consider it, at that point they cut themselves off from quote unquote immortality. Okay, perpetual life on earth. Okay, so they cut themselves off from Yah once they made that decision. That was the first step. Okay, so now, even though, like it says in the scriptures, the day that you eat thereof, thou shalt surely die. Technically, they didn't physically die. They were still physically living. But the first death was the most important because that was the spiritual death that took place when they were cut off. Okay, so now they're short circuit. And I gave that example of some of you all, that were in the absorption classes, of that circuit, the image of that circuit, which is like the rhythm of life circuit diagram I created. Where you got the socket and you got the bulb and the lamp, and you got the connections. You got the two wires, one going from the socket to the bulb, and the other one going from the bulb back to the socket. And if you use that as an example, where Yah is the source, he's unlimited power, and that electricity from the source is going to the lamp. But in order for the lamp to work, there has to be another wire that goes back to the source. Because the moment that you flick the switch and make the connection, if the electricity goes to the bulb, it's going to be too much for the bulb to hold, and it'll blow. So there has to be another wire that goes back from the lamp or the bulb back to the source. Okay, and that's how lamps traditionally work. So in order for that to take place, that connection has to be complete. And I use that as an example for us. We're creations created by the Creator. And since we were created to be in His image, that means that, there's a specific accountability and responsibility that we have to engage in consciously in order to maintain that connection to the Creator. He gave us life freely. So we got power being given to us. But in order for us to stay connected to Yah, we have to, just like that lamp, give that power back to the Creator. Okay, we have to open ourselves up, allow that energy to flow. So what does that mean tangibly for us? That means that the power Yah gave us to be in His image, we have to thus share it with creation. We have to use it at the behest and behalf of all of creation on this planet, all of humanity. We have to be servant. We have to give back. But the moment we make a decision that's rooted in egotism and selfishness, to say, I'm not doing that. I'm doing my own thing. I'm gonna take all this intellect, wisdom, power, and just do my own thing with it. We're essentially trying to hold on to all that power for ourselves, even though we are created to give it and to allow it to flow out. So us holding on to that power, which isn't ours to just hold on to, it eventually causes us to deteriorate and self-destruct. And for Adam in the Genesis, that process took hundreds and hundreds of years until they physically began to, die. So the second death the Father talks about is the death of the quote unquote inner organs. Okay, all your physical being, the part of you that houses this quote unquote spirit. Okay, and in that second death, he identifies that the soul is the part of your physical being that houses your spiritual essence. Okay, now that's the soul. And that soul, depending on who you are, what time of you came into this world, it will, and how long you decide to, maintain your existence, your soul will begin to deteriorate if you don't apply God's instructions, to the point where either your brain goes, your heart goes, your liver goes, your colon goes, something goes, and your body can't maintain the cycle of life anymore, and then you physically die. And the Father identified that as being the third death, where you physically are no longer conscious anymore. You're gone. Your organs are done. Your consciousness is done, and your spirit no longer is housed in your body anymore. Okay, but the soul is the physical aspect of our being that maintains the integrity of that spirit in us. Okay, that's what the Father identified as the actual soul. So I hope that gave some insight or clarity for Ayana.